Here is a big mistake teachers make when they are working with phrasal verbs with their students. This is a mistake because it wastes a lot of time, class time, and it needlessly uses up students' mental energy. What is the mistake? They try to get their ESL students to use phrasal verbs when speaking and writing. What we, as ESL instructors, want to focus on concerning phrasal verbs is comprehension. We want them to understand as many common phrasal verbs as possible when they hear them used or when they read them. And we can do this fairly quickly. I'll show you how. Once I was invited to observe a relatively new ESL teacher because he wanted me to see how he was doing in his classes. He did very well during the first half of the class, but then he switched to teaching some phrasal verbs. He introduced 5 of them, gave some examples, and then tried to get students to use them in speaking. It was kind of painful to watch the students struggle to use them correctly. For example, he wanted to teach get away with, the phrasal verb get away with. He took a couple of minutes to set up a situation in which a student, Ben, was cheating, but the teacher didn't see him do it. Then he asked the students if Ben got into trouble, and he hoped that they would use got away with. Finally, one student said, Ben got cheating away with. So then the teacher had to take some time to explain the rules for using the phrasal verb. I felt sorry for the teacher and the students. The teacher later told me he just thought he was supposed to teach students to use them in speaking. He thought that's just what you're supposed to do. The sad part of this is that I doubt that those students will ever need to use get away with when talking. Or, if they do, it might not be for months or years in the future. However, there is a fair chance that they'll hear get away with in a conversation or in a movie or when reading something. All that time the teacher spent just on one phrasal verb could have been better used teaching 5 phrasal verbs for comprehension. Now, you might say, David, ESL students want to sound natural when they speak, so they want to use phrasal verbs, and I agree. And here's how they learn to use them naturally. They first hear them in a context. After some practice understanding them through listening and reading, those phrasal verbs become passive vocabulary. Then they might hear them inside or outside the classroom in a new context. If the opportunity is right, they will then try to use them. They might make a mistake, but if they do, they will be open to someone correcting them. For example, I was helping one of my students, Wendy, with her essay. One of her sentences was, cell phones can be the cause of problems between friends. I didn't want to just tell her that being was a mistake, so I gave her a hint. I said, you have a mistake with your verb. She looked at her sentence for a few seconds and she shook her head. She couldn't find it. So I used a phrasal verb which we had practiced in some listening exercises the week before. I asked her, do you give up? She smiled and said, yes, I give up. So, give up transferred from passive vocabulary for Wendy to an active one at that moment. Another time, Daniel, another one of my ESL students, got back a homework assignment with a lot of mistakes marked on it. And he looked pretty distraught. Then he surprised me. He asked me, can I do over it? Do over, the phrasal verb do over, was one we had studied previously. And again, we had only practiced it, studied it in listening and reading exercises. But the context that day was right for him to try to use it in speaking. Although he made a mistake, I was impressed by his effort. And so in order to help him understand the mistake, I merely said, yes, you can do it over. In the link below, I'll share with you some effective phrasal verb exercises that practice through listening and reading that I've used. I've used these with students, and you can download these for free and try them out with your students. Actually, I found the best exercises that students can do to learn phrasal verbs are push-ups and sit-ups. No, I'm just kidding. Those aren't included in the download that I'll supply you with. Oh, about Daniel, who wanted to revise his assignment. I got a kick out of him the next day. He brought me his revised paper and said, "Here is my homework. I did it over like you said I could."